"Gather around, ladies and gentlemen," the attorney announced, his voice echoing through the mahogany-paneled room. It was a simple will reading, or so everyone thought moments earlier. Ebony Johnson, a soft-spoken black woman with unshakable dignity, had been scorned, mocked, and dismissed by faces twisted in arrogance. Little did they know that everything was about to change in the blink of an eye. With the crackle of old parchment and a gasp from the executor, the room fell silent, hearts pounding with anticipation. This was more than a last testament. It was the key to a legacy that would turn every smug grin into a look of stunned disbelief. Ebony Johnson was in her small Atlanta apartment when the letter arrived, thick envelope gold seal, and the name Morgan & Morgan on the front A. Will reading in New York City, involving someone named Gerald Davenport. She had never heard the name before. Puzzled, she double-checked the envelope. Her name was printed clearly. Ms. Ebony L. Johnson. It wasn't a mistake, with no known family. Beyond her late grandmother, the possibilities spun scam, legal issue, or a distant connection she'd never heard of. A call to the firm confirmed it. They expected her in New York within the week, with a flight and hotel already arranged. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. "Mr. Davenport insisted on your presence." Ebony hesitated. She was a waitress living paycheck to paycheck. Flying to New York felt absurd, but if there were answers tied to her past or future, she had to know. She packed a small bag, told her boss she had a family emergency, and boarded the plane with a nervous heart and a flicker of hope. New York overwhelmed Ebony the moment she stepped off the plane. The towering skyline, the endless rush of people. It all felt like another planet. A black sedan sent by the law firm waited at the curb. The driver politely took her suitcase and opened the door, treating her with a level of formality she wasn't used to. As the city flashed by her window, Ebony felt small in her simple jeans and worn jacket. By the time they reached her hotel in Midtown, she was numb with sensory overload. The room they booked was modest by New York standards, but far grander than anything she'd ever stayed in queen bed city view and quiet elegance. The next morning, dressed in her best, a black skirt and white blouse, Ebony arrived at Morgan & Morgan's sleek offices. Everything from the marble floors to the solemn receptionist reminded her she didn't belong here, but she squared her shoulders and followed the escort to the 22nd floor. Inside the conference room, eyes turned as she entered. Wealthy, well-dressed strangers stared silently, judging. At the head of the table stood Atticus Roberts, senior attorney, who greeted her with a measured nod. As she sat at the table, heart racing, she realized one thing with certainty. Whatever was coming, her life would never be the same. Atticus Roberts opened a thick folder labeled with Gerald Davenport's name. Before we proceed with the formal reading, he said Mr. Davenport left instructions that we watch a brief video he recorded. He wanted his voice to guide this process. He pressed a button on a remote, and the lights in the conference room dimmed. A projector screen rolled down, and the image of an elderly man, presumably Gerald Davenport, flickered into view. Gerald looked distinguished, yet frail, as if burdened by both age and a weighty conscience. His hair was white, neatly combed, and his voice, though hoarse, carried authority. "To my beloved family and esteemed friends," he began. "If you're watching this, I have now passed on. I've entrusted Morgan & Morgan with my final wishes." He paused, his eyes full of regret. "I have secrets, truths that I withheld for too long, and an inheritance that must go to the rightful individual. Some of you may be surprised by the instructions left behind, but I ask that you respect my decision." Ebony felt a tension rise in the room. The other guests, who must be relatives of Gerald, murmured quietly. She caught fragments of their whispers. Who is she? Why is a stranger here? Is she after money? Ebony looked down at her hands, heart pounding with the realization that this was indeed about money. Lots of it from the looks of things. Before the video could continue, one woman with icy blue eyes and a pointed chin interjected, "I'm sorry, but who is she?" She demanded, nodding toward Ebony. Gerald didn't have any black relatives. Are we sure she's in the right room? Her name tag read Victoria Davenport, presumably related to Gerald, perhaps a daughter or niece. Atticus gave Victoria a cool glance and cleared his throat. "Miss Davenport, please. All will become clear in time. I ask you to remain calm so we can fulfill your father's wishes." Victoria scoffed, but remained silent, smoothing her expensive blouse with an offended air. The video resumed, Gerald's trembling hands clasped together. This inheritance is not just about finances. It's about rectifying a wrong and offering an opportunity for someone who deserves it. To you, Ebony Johnson, if you are here, I have tried to find you for many years, but circumstances prevented me from reaching out personally. I hope this bequest aids you in living the life that you deserve. Gasps erupted around the table. Ebony's breath caught in her throat. She felt the weight of every pair of eyes in that room shift from confusion to anger, except for Atticus Roberts, who remained neutral as an impartial executor of the will. Gerald's words on the screen continued to echo. Ebony Johnson, I pray that what I've left you offers a fresh start. To my family and friends, I ask for respect toward Ebony, as she is connected to me in ways you do not fully understand. Just like that, the screen faded to black. The hush in the room was deafening. Ebony dared not look up, bracing herself for the inevitable backlash. She didn't even know the nature of her connection to Gerald or what exactly she was inheriting, yet the hostility in the room was already palpable. Victoria Davenport broke the silence again, her voice dripping with contempt. What is the meaning of this? Gerald never mentioned any Ebony Johnson. We demand an explanation. A few others nodded in agreement. Their eyes narrowed, scanning Ebony as though she were an imposter. In their midst, Atticus Roberts laid a hand on the folder. If we could proceed in an orderly fashion, I will read the official. All questions will be answered afterward. His stern tone momentarily quelled the dissent. But Ebony knew this was just the beginning of an ordeal that could either shatter her life or catapult her into an unforeseen future. Atticus Roberts adjusted his glasses and began reading in a formal, steady voice. I, Gerald Howard Davenport, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this document to be my last will and testament. To my daughter, Victoria Davenport, I bequeath the sum of $200,000. To my nephew, Quentin Davenport, I leave $100,000. To my loyal friend, Martha Harris, I provide a monthly stipend for life, covering all her living expenses. The remainder of my estate, including but not limited to my property, at 189 Riverside Drive, my investment portfolio, my philanthropic foundation, Davenport Solutions, my shares in Redwood Industries, and any additional assets outlined in my estate documents, I bequeath to Ebony L. Johnson. The final words seemed to reverberate like thunderclaps in the silent chamber. Ebony's mind went blank. For a moment, she thought she had misunderstood the rest of the estate that sounded like everything. She felt the blood drain from her face, and her pulse quickened as she realized the magnitude of what had just been read. The reaction from the Davenport family was immediate and explosive. Victoria leapt to her feet, her voice slicing through the tension like a blade. "This is absolutely outrageous," she shrieked. "I am Gerald's daughter. He had no right. This must be a forgery. Spit flew from her lips as her face twisted with fury. Another man, who Ebony assumed to be Quentin, joined in. "We'll contest this. We'll hire an army of lawyers." Chaos erupted, voices, overlapping chairs, scraping against the polished floor as relatives clamored for answers. Ebony shrunk back, her breath catching in her throat, wishing she could sink into the leather chair and disappear. She hadn't asked for any of this. She was just a waitress from Georgia who had gotten a mysterious letter, yet here she was, apparently the majority heir to a vast fortune. Atticus raised his hands in a calming gesture. "Please everyone remain seated. The will is clear." Mr. Davenport had this will prepared, witnessed and filed lawfully. "There is no evidence of forgery. If you have any disputes, they can be handled in probate court, but as it stands, the will is valid. But who is she a woman?" Ebony hadn't noticed before, exclaimed, turning with narrowed eyes. Gerald owed money to all sorts of people. She could be anyone, some con artist. Ebony finally managed to speak, her voice almost trembling. "I'm not a con artist. I didn't know Gerald Davenport. I don't understand this any more than you do." The words sounded meek, but they were the only truth she had. Victoria's gaze was venomous, her tone even more cutting. "Likely story. You show up here with your sob story, trying to claim what's rightfully ours. This is pure madness." She turned to Atticus. "She must be scamming us. We demand an investigation." Atticus, keeping his composure, explained. Mr. Davenport did have a private investigator working for years. The investigation revealed that Ebony Johnson was likely related, though the specifics were not fully disclosed. Regardless, this is the legally binding testament. He turned to Ebony. "As the executor, Ms. Johnson, I will guide you through the transfer of assets, but perhaps we should take a short break to let everyone process this information. We can reconvene in half an hour." Atticus stood, indicating that the session was temporarily adjourned. Ebony felt a swirl of emotions, disbelief, fear, confusion, and even a strange flicker of hope. She could hear the outraged chatter of the Davenport relatives as they broke into furious clusters. A security guard politely ushered Ebony to a separate waiting area, away from the glaring eyes. Her mind raced. How was she connected to Gerald Davenport? Why had he left nearly everything to her? While Ebony sat in the waiting area, sipping water from a paper cup, Atticus Roberts approached her. His expression was guarded, but not unkind. "Ms. Johnson, may we speak privately for a moment?" She nodded shakily. They moved to a small side office. The space was quiet, with walls lined by legal texts. Atticus closed the door behind them. "I know this is overwhelming," he began. Gerald Davenport was a complicated man. He didn't share all the details with me, but from what I gathered, he carried a long-held regret. My best guess is that you might be the result of a relationship he had many years ago. Ebony felt her heart lurch. "That can't be. I mean, I never knew my mother. My grandmother always said my father was a nameless man who disappeared. She never mentioned Gerald Davenport. She never mentioned anyone." Atticus sighed. Unfortunately, Gerald provided no direct explanation other than what was in the video and the private investigation file. But he was very clear in his instructions that you inherit the lion's share of his estate. He believed you deserved it. He paused, measuring his words. "I realize this puts you in a precarious position, especially with the family's animosity. However, the will is straightforward, and I intend to carry out Mr. Davenport's wishes as the law demands." Tears threatened to break from Ebony's eyes, but she steadied herself. It was too surreal. I'm not prepared for this. I live in a tiny apartment in Atlanta. I have no savings, no real education. How am I supposed to handle all of this? She gestured vaguely, indicating the intangible mountain of wealth and responsibility. Atticus offered a sympathetic smile. We can set up a trust, financial advisors, whatever you need. But first we must finalize the probate process. The Davenport family will likely contest. Be prepared for confrontation. They will dig into your life, hoping to find a reason to discredit you. A chill danced up Ebony's spine. She already felt unsettled by Victoria's aggressive stance. The idea of a legal battle being paraded through courts was terrifying, yet a part of her also bristled at the hostility. Why shouldn't she claim what the will rightfully bequeathed to her? She hadn't asked Gerald for anything. Atticus patted a small stack of papers. For now, let's rejoin the main session. I'll explain the timeline for estate settlement. The Davenport family might wish to ask you questions. You are, of course, free to answer or remain silent. It's your right. Ebony swallowed, I understand. They returned to the conference room where the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Atticus resumed his seat at the head of the table. Victoria glared at Ebony with cold fury, while Quentin and 2 other relatives regarded her with suspicion and malice. Ebony felt as though she were on trial. "Shall we continue?" Atticus asked, pressing his lips together in a thin line. He briefly explained the probate process and the responsibilities of an executor. Then he opened the floor to questions. Victoria was first, leaning forward with a sneer. "Ebony Johnson, is it? Where have you come from, and how did you weasel your way into my father's good graces?" Ebony tried to keep her voice steady. "I'm from Atlanta. I received a letter asking me to come here. I never met Mr. Davenport personally, and I don't know why he left his estate to me." She sensed the words sounded hollow to them. "A likely story," Quentin muttered. "Wealthy men get conned all the time." "You heard the video," Ebony replied, raising her gaze to meet Quentin's eyes. "He clearly stated he'd been looking for me." Not the other way around. His jaw clenched. Victoria smoothed her hair, fighting to maintain composure. "I'll have you know, Ms. Johnson, we have powerful friends in Manhattan, judges, attorneys, business moguls. We won't let nobody swoop in and take everything." Atticus intervened. "This is not the time or place for threats. The law recognizes Mr. Davenport's final wishes. If you plan to challenge the will, you must file a suit in probate court. Until then, Ebony Johnson is the primary beneficiary. Let us maintain civility. I am civil," Victoria hissed. But the venom in her stare told a different story. Ebony's hands shook beneath the table. She clenched them to stop the tremors. The battle lines were drawn, and she felt woefully unprepared. Little did she know this was only the opening skirmish in a much larger war over Gerald Davenport's fortune, and the secrets behind it. After the tumultuous reading, Ebony made her way back to the hotel. She felt numb, as though her body were moving on autopilot, while her mind wrestled with the day's events. Inheriting a fortune seemed unreal, but even more unsettling was the notion that this man, Gerald Davenport, could have been her father, or related in some other life-altering way. She locked herself in her hotel room and stared out the window at the Manhattan skyline, its lights sparkling in the twilight. Her phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "You have no idea what you're messing with. Go back to Atlanta before it's too late." Fear knotted in her chest. She tried to steady her breathing. Who could that be? Victoria or Quentin, most likely, or another Davenport relative who had gained her number from the legal documents. She sank onto the bed, mind racing. This was more than hostility. It was a threat. For a moment, Ebony considered leaving, walking away from all of it. The prospect of a drawn-out legal fight in a city she barely knew was terrifying. But then she remembered the years of struggle, the times she had to decide between groceries and rent, the countless double shifts at the diner. Here was a chance to break that cycle, to finally have some measure of security. And if Gerald Davenport had indeed been her father, he owed her this much. Walking away would mean denying whatever truth he had tried to convey in his final moments. She resolved to stay early the next morning. She met with Atticus to discuss the next steps. He was sympathetic, offering to arrange private security if she felt threatened, but Ebony declined, not wanting to escalate matters. He suggested she move into the Riverside Drive property that Gerald had bequeathed. It was a sprawling townhouse overlooking the Hudson River, currently unoccupied, that might make it easier for you to handle estate matters, he explained, though you should be aware the Davenport family is likely to escalate their efforts to discredit you. Ebony weighed her options. Staying in a hotel was costly, even if the law firm covered it. Perhaps living in the townhouse would help her become more familiar with Gerald Davenport's life. She might find clues in his study letters, diaries, something to confirm her connection. Reluctantly, she agreed. That evening, Atticus provided her with a set of keys. A driver picked her up and took her across town. The property at 189 Riverside Drive was breathtaking. A 5-story brick townhouse with ornate balconies and tall windows set behind a short iron gate. Ebony's heart pounded as the driver unlocked the front door. Stepping inside was like walking into another world. Polished hardwood floors, a grand staircase, and rooms filled with expensive furniture. An echo of emptiness lingered, as though the house had been expecting its occupant to return, but never had. The driver set her suitcase down, handed her the keys, and left. Ebony found herself alone in this cavernous home. She wandered from room to room, flicking on lights, feeling like an imposter. Gilt-framed paintings adorned the walls, heavy curtains blocked the city's glow, and plush carpets swallowed the sound of her footsteps. In the library, leather-bound books filled shelves from floor to ceiling. A heavy desk stood near a window overlooking the river. Ebony marveled at the opulence. She could have never imagined living in a place like this. She settled in a small bedroom on the second floor, opting for something cozier rather than the master suite. As she changed into more comfortable clothes, a persistent thought gnawed at her. She had to know if Gerald Davenport was truly her father. That night, Ebony roamed the house in search of clues. She found letters, documents, and photographs, most of them displayed in the living room. Frames showcased a younger Gerald with a woman Ebony assumed was his wife. Victoria was visible in some pictures, but Ebony found no photographs of any other children. Finally, in a far corner of the library, she discovered a locked drawer in the desk. She fumbled around until she found a tiny key hidden behind some books. Her heart hammered as she turned the lock. Inside, she discovered a stack of papers, including what appeared to be a birth certificate for Ebony L. Johnson. The father's name was left blank, but taped to the back was a handwritten note. Found her never told. Julia refused to let me near. My biggest regret. Ebony's eyes welled with tears. Julia was her mother's name, at least the name Ebony's grandmother had once mentioned in passing. Gerald must have discovered Ebony's existence years ago. Perhaps he tried to reach out, but was blocked. A mix of anger, sadness, and relief coursed through her. He had known about her, had even gone to the trouble of finding out her name. But Ebony had grown up never knowing she had a father who might have tried to connect. She wondered why Julia had refused. Had he been married at the time? Was she the product of an affair? Her mind swirled with unanswered questions, There was no joy in discovering a father too late, just regret for missed opportunities and unresolved pain. Regardless, the documents were real enough to confirm Gerald believed Ebony to be his child, but he hadn't told a soul, evidently not even his wife, or maybe he did, and that caused irreparable rifts. Ebony wasn't sure. She felt a sense of validation. She wasn't a scammer, and there was evidence to prove it. Yet the gnawing fear of the Davenport family's retaliation lingered. If they were already furious, how would they respond once they learned Ebony truly might be Gerald's biological daughter? She sensed a storm gathering, and it was about to break. Days turned into a week, and the dust from the will reading only seemed to intensify rather than settle. Ebony remained in the Riverside Drive townhouse, meeting daily with Atticus to discuss legal steps. Sure enough, Victoria and her allies filed a formal challenge to the will claiming undue influence and questioning Ebony's legitimacy. The tabloids caught wind of the saga. Mystery heiress claims Davenport fortune. Read one headline, secret love child or con artist teased another. Ebony was bombarded with reporters outside the townhouse. She stayed indoors, mostly worried that any public misstep might feed the rumors late one afternoon. While Ebony was combing through more of Gerald's documents in the library, the doorbell rang. She tensed. It was either more press or someone from the Davenport family. She crept to the window and peered out to see a young woman about her age, nervously shuffling her feet on the doorstep. She was black with braided hair and a cautious expression. Ebony opened the door slightly, using the chain as a barrier. "Yes." The woman gave a hesitant smile. "Hi. I know this is odd. My name is Tasha Brown. I work at Morgan & Morgan as a paralegal. Atticus asked me to bring these documents to you." She lifted a leather briefcase. "He also asked me to see if you need any help sorting through the estate papers." Ebony exhaled, relieved it wasn't a reporter. She removed the chain and let Tasha in. The two young women exchanged awkward smiles. Ebony led Tasha into the library where stacks of old letters and legal documents lay scattered over the desk. Tasha's eyes widened at the chaos. "Wow, you've been busy." "I'm trying to piece together my mother's connection to Gerald Davenport," Ebony explained. "I found some clues, but it's still a mess." Tasha set the briefcase down. "I understand. The office is abuzz with rumors. Everyone wonders if you're truly Mr. Davenport's daughter. I think you are, if you don't mind me saying. Why else would he do all this?" Ebony nodded and showed Tasha the note she found taped to her birth certificate. "Looks like he found out about me, but never got the chance to make it official." Tasha studied it, her expression compassionate. "That's heavy, I'm sorry. You never got to meet him. It's clear he cared in some way, at least enough to track you down and leave you his estate. I believe his intentions were good, but I also know how these high society families can be. They'll do anything to discredit you." Ebony's stomach twisted. "They're already calling me a gold digger, a con artist. It's overwhelming." Tasha gently patted Ebony's shoulder. "Listen, I get it. I've dealt with a lot of will contests at the firm. Some are vicious. If Gerald Davenport wanted to right a wrong, he must have known it would cause a scandal. Maybe he felt guilty all these years." The two women spent hours that afternoon sorting papers. Tasha explained the legal jargon, pointing out which financial records might be crucial if Ebony needed to prove a pattern of Gerald's intent to support her. Ebony took comfort in Tasha's presence. She was the first person in this ordeal who didn't treat her like a pariah. That night, as Ebony thanked Tasha at the front door, Tasha paused. "You're going to win, Ebony. The law is on your side, and you've got proof you're Gerald's daughter. They're going to try to rattle you, but stay strong Ebony forced a smile. "Thank you, Tasha. I really appreciate your help, but Tasha's optimism couldn't quell the storm raging in Ebony's mind. She feared that the Davenport family, with their wealth and influence, would launch a relentless campaign against her. The thought of her personal life being scrutinized in court made her stomach churn. More than that, Ebony wrestled with the ghost of a father she never knew. No amount of money could heal that wound. The next day, Ebony made the mistake of checking social media. Hashtags like Davenport Heiress and Ebony Johnson Con spiraled out of control. Countless strangers debated her life, some spewing racism, others spinning conspiracy theories. Ebony slammed her laptop shut, tears burning her eyes. She cursed her curiosity for delving into the digital cesspool. Her phone lit up with a call from a number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Hello," a silky voice purred on the other end. "Ms. Johnson? So nice to finally speak with you. My name is Caroline Linton, a reporter for the New York Daily Post. I'd love an exclusive interview. Our readers are dying to know more about you." Ebony tensed. "I'm sorry, I'm not interested in any interviews right now." Caroline chuckled lightly, a sound that sent a chill through Ebony. "We'll be running a piece tomorrow, with or without your input. I just thought I'd offer you a chance to present your side of the story." Ebony tightened her grip on the phone. "There's no story to tell, Caroline. I'm just following the instructions of Mr. Davenport's will." Caroline's tone shifted to something more predatory. "Of course, but we have sources who claim you lived in questionable conditions, had financial troubles, and maybe even run-ins with the law. You wouldn't want that narrative to overshadow the truth, would you?" Ebony's jaw dropped. She'd had some late payments on bills, sure, but never any brushes with the law. "That's a lie. I've never broken the law." She seethed. "Who told you that?" The reporter laughed again. "It's amazing how rumors can spread." "Well, you know where to find me, if you want to clear things up. Have a nice day. Ms. Johnson?" The line went dead. Ebony threw her phone onto the sofa, her heart hammering. The intimidation was suffocating. She tried calling Atticus, but it went to voicemail. She wanted to warn him about the smear campaign. This was bigger than a family feud. Now the entire city was watching. She realized that if she didn't stand up for herself, the Davenport family and the media would turn her into a villain. Later that afternoon, Ebony was pacing the foyer when the doorbell echoed through the townhouse again. She peered through the peephole. Victoria Davenport stood on the stoop, flanked by two men in tailored suits. Ebony's heart sank. She contemplated ignoring them, but something compelled her to confront Victoria face to face. She opened the door, and Victoria flashed a falsely sweet smile. "Miss Johnson, may we come in? We have some business to discuss." Ebony's palms grew clammy. "I'd prefer to talk out here. I'm not comfortable letting strangers into my home right now." Victoria's jaw twitched at the word, "my home," but she maintained her veneer of politeness. "Very well." She turned to the suited men who Ebony presumed were lawyers. "This is Mr. Rourke and Mr. Hamilton. They represent my interests." Ebony nodded curtly, uncertain how to respond. "We're giving you a chance to settle," Victoria announced, flipping her hair back. "We'll drop the will contest if you agree to sign over the majority of Davenport Solutions and the Riverside Drive property. We'll let you keep a small portion enough to live on comfortably." She said it as though bestowing a grand favor. Ebony raised an eyebrow, anger flaring. "Why would I do that? The will is clear. Gerald left me everything, except the amounts specifically designated to you and the others." Victoria's lips curled. You can fight us if you want. But we have resources. The legal process could drag on for years, draining you mentally and financially. You think you can afford top-tier lawyers and the negative press for that long. We're offering you a graceful exit. Ebony stared at Victoria, appalled by the arrogance. She recalled Tasha's words, "Stay strong." Ebony squared her shoulders. "I'm not selling my rights to my own inheritance. If this is your best offer, you can leave now." Victoria's mask cracked. "You foolish girl." She motioned for her lawyers to step forward, but Ebony maintained her stance. "My father was obviously senile. He had no business willing you everything. If you were truly his daughter, why wait until his death to come forward? You're a fraud, Ebony Johnson." Ebony's anger hardened into resolve. She thought about the note, about Gerald's investigation, about the birth certificate. "I have proof," she snapped. "Gerald wasn't senile. He spent years trying to find me. Maybe he didn't want to upset you while he was alive. Maybe he was afraid of your wrath. I don't know. But I won't let you bully me into giving up." Victoria hissed something under her breath. One of her lawyers tried to intervene. "Miss Davenport, perhaps we should—" She shot him a glare, then turned back to Ebony. "Fine. If you think you can stand against the Davenport family, enjoy your little castle while it lasts. Once we're through with you in court, you'll be left with nothing." She pivoted on her expensive heels and stalked away, her lawyers scurrying after her. Ebony slammed the door. Her heart pounded like a drum and her hands trembled. She had never felt such fierce determination or such anger. This was about more than money. It was about reclaiming a past that was stolen from her, proving she had every right to stand in this townhouse and call it her own. In the days following Victoria's confrontation, Ebony threw herself into unraveling Gerald's secrets. She pored over diaries, letters, and archived documents from Davenport Solutions. Tasha dropped by frequently to assist. Each discovery was a piece in a jigsaw puzzle that painted Gerald Davenport as a man torn between his affluent world and a hidden relationship with a woman named Julia, Ebony's mother. There were scribbled notes about hush money, references to an estranged marriage, and heartfelt regrets about a daughter he'd never held. One chilly morning, Ebony and Tasha uncovered an old photograph tucked away in a book. It showed a young Gerald with a radiant black woman, both laughing as if caught in a moment of genuine joy. On the back was a date from nearly 30 years ago, close to Ebony's birth year. A single word was written, man. Ebony traced the outline of her mother's face, tears lining her eyes. She finally saw proof of that forbidden love. It was both liberating and heartbreaking. If Gerald had recognized Ebony as his daughter, why keep her a secret for so long? Why not fight for his paternal rights openly? She saw snippets in his journal about fear of scandal, worry about losing everything if the truth got out. Ebony's frustration mounted. She was an actual person, not just a secret. She had grown up poor, yearning for a father's love and support. Now the family that had reaped the benefits of Gerald's fortune wanted to keep her in the shadows. Tasha squeezed Ebony's shoulder. "This is exactly the kind of evidence that will shut down the doubt about your identity. A photograph with a date, a note in his journal. This is gold in court." Ebony exhaled slowly. "Yes, but it doesn't change the fact that I never got to know him. That's the tragedy." Tasha agreed softly. Outside, wind rattled the window panes. Ebony felt the storm brewing within her, fueled by a need for vindication. She vowed to stand her ground, to let the courts and the world know she was not just some intruder in the Davenport legacy. She would claim her rightful place, or at least clear her name, if nothing else. The day of the first probate hearing dawned grey and dreary. Ebony arrived at the courthouse, flanked by Atticus Roberts and a team of attorneys he had assembled. Tasha came for moral support, offering Ebony a reassuring nod. Across the aisle, Victoria sat with her legal counsel, wearing a smug expression. Quentin and a few other relatives lined the seats behind her. The hearing was procedural, primarily to establish the validity of the will. Victoria's lawyers argued that Gerald was under duress or mentally compromised, citing Ebony's sudden appearance as suspicious. Ebony's team countered with documented evidence of Gerald's thorough mental evaluations dated just 3 months before his death, declaring him of sound mind. They also presented the private investigator's findings that connected Ebony to Gerald. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened impassively before adjourning for the day. While no final decisions were made, Ebony felt a sliver of vindication when the judge stated that the will appeared legitimate at first glance. Victoria's side fumed. As Ebony left the courtroom, she caught sight of Victoria glaring daggers, but Ebony lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. Outside reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. Ebony shielded her face, ignoring the barrage of shouted questions. Atticus guided her to a waiting car. Once inside, Ebony exhaled a shaky breath. That was just the beginning, wasn't it? Atticus nodded. There will be more hearings, depositions, possible appeals. But you handled yourself well today. Don't let the media hounds get to you. Ebony swallowed. She was exhausted, but an ember of hope flickered. She might yet emerge victorious. As weeks turned to months, the legal battle raged on. Victoria's attorneys flooded the court with motions each designed to delay and drain Ebony's resolve. Tabloids continued their smear campaigns, fueled by leaks of Ebony's private struggles. Her old landlord stepping forward to complain about late rent payments, ex-boyfriends insinuating that Ebony was always looking for a big break. It was a circus, and Ebony was the unwilling star. Yet through it all, Ebony clung to the evidence. She provided the court with copies of Gerald's handwritten notes, the birth certificate, and the photograph with her mother. A DNA test was proposed, but the Davenport side objected to exhuming Gerald's body, calling it morbid and unnecessary. The judge caught between the two sides demanded further investigation. Meanwhile, Ebony was forced to endure endless depositions, her entire life laid bare for the court to see. The stress took a toll. Ebony lost weight, had trouble sleeping, and her once bright spirit dimmed under the relentless pressure. Even Tasha's visits became more somber, but Ebony refused to surrender. She wouldn't let Victoria and her privileged entourage rewrite the narrative. This wasn't just about money. It was about legitimacy, identity, and closure. Eventually, a major turning point occurred when one of Gerald's closest friends, a man named Bruce Caldwell, stepped forward. He was a business associate who had retired to Florida, largely disconnected from the New York high society gossip. Bruce contacted Atticus to share a written statement he had known for years that Gerald had a secret daughter. Bruce recalled late-night confessions where Gerald expressed remorse for not coming clean. He even remembered Gerald describing Ebony's mother, Julia, as the love he could never publicly acknowledge. Bruce provided transcripts of an old voicemail from Gerald verifying these claims. It was the smoking gun. Ebony's team needed a neutral witness to confirm Gerald's mental capacity, his guilt and his intent to leave Ebony his estate. When this evidence came to light in court, Victoria's attorneys blanched. The judge ordered them to explain why they had not disclosed such relevant information earlier. The Davenport family's facade began to crack. The hearing that followed. Bruce Caldwell's testimony was intense. Attorneys sparred like heavyweight fighters, each side delivering blows of evidence and counter-arguments. But the tide had turned. Victoria's claims of Ebony's deceit were weakening under the weight of Bruce's testimony, Gerald's notes, and the undeniable paper trail leading back decades. Then came a dramatic moment no one saw coming. As Victoria took the stand to testify, Ebony's lawyers questioned her about her father's health in his final months. Cornered by the evidence, Victoria broke down, tears streaming through her carefully applied makeup. In a moment of raw emotion, she made a confession I knew about Ebony. She admitted Daddy told me on his deathbed. He was delirious, or so I pretended to believe. He kept apologizing, saying he should have brought her into our family. I was so angry, so hurt, I wanted it all for myself. I didn't want her to have it, even if she was his daughter. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Victoria wiped her tears, her anger unraveling into heartbreak. Daddy and I argued. He tried to make me promise to find Ebony to do right by her, but I just couldn't accept it. Not after all the years he ignored me while living in regret. I refused to believe him. Ebony's heart thudded in her chest. She looked at Victoria, seeing a woman who, in her own twisted way, was just as scarred by Gerald's secrets as she was. Victoria's tears were real, but they did not excuse her cruelty. Still, this confession shattered any lingering doubts the court might have had about Ebony's legitimacy. Ebony was Gerald's daughter. His final wish was to leave his estate to her. When the judge delivered the ruling weeks later, Ebony felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The will was upheld. The challenge by Victoria and the other Davenport relatives was dismissed. The judge declared that Ebony Johnson, recognized as Gerald Davenport's biological daughter, was indeed the primary heir. The crowd in the courtroom buzzed. Reporters scrambled to file stories. Victoria stared at the floor. Her face flushed with a mix of bitterness and relief, as if a heavy burden of deceit had finally been lifted. Ebony could hardly breathe. She had won. Gerald's final wishes stood, and she was free to inherit the estate, Riverside Drive, the business holdings, the philanthropic foundation, all of it. There would be formalities. Yes, but the war was essentially over. Atticus and Tasha each squeezed Ebony's shoulders, beaming. "Congratulations," Tasha whispered. Teary-eyed, Ebony fought to find her voice, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She glanced over to Victoria, who seemed lost, adrift in a sea of guilt. For a fleeting moment, Ebony almost felt pity. Word spread quickly. While Ebony's name was finally cleared, the Davenport family faced public scrutiny for their attempts to disinherit a legitimate heir. Victoria and Quentin found themselves shunned by many in their social circles. Organizations that once courted their presence now distanced themselves from the scandal. Their reputations were tarnished, and business partners severed ties, wary of being associated with a family that had tried to cover up the truth. One by one, those who had humiliated Ebony faced a slew of repercussions. A reporter who had viciously smeared Ebony was fired when it was discovered she fabricated quotes to boost her sensational headlines. Online trolls found themselves drowning in disclaimers and retractions as Ebony's lawyers threatened defamation suits. Even the law firm representing Victoria lost several clients who no longer trusted their ethics. Victoria, inheriting only the $200,000 granted by the will, attempted to keep her lavish lifestyle afloat. But the cost of the lengthy legal battle, plus the exodus of her social circle, left her in a precarious position. She sold her penthouse to cover mounting debts. Quentin similarly struggled his business ventures, suffering in the wake of negative press. The once impenetrable Davenport veneer of wealth and power began to crumble, replaced by whispers of scandal and hypocrisy. Doors that had swung open for them before slammed shut. Meanwhile, Ebony found herself with the daunting task of managing a massive estate. She hired reputable financial advisors, established scholarships in her mother's memory, and began reorganizing Davenport Solutions to be more inclusive and community-oriented. She kept Tasha by her side, appointing her as a key assistant in managing day-to-day affairs. Together, they dreamed of turning Davenport Solutions into a company that benefited people from all walks of life. Though Ebony felt a bittersweet ache for the father she never met, she found solace in fulfilling what she believed would be his final wish to use his wealth for good. The media had no choice but to shift its narrative. Headlines now read, "Ebony Johnson, the real deal." Gradually, the public sentiment turned in her favor. She became something of a local celebrity, known not just for inheriting a fortune, but for her humility and charitable endeavors. Amid her new responsibilities, Ebony felt an unresolved tug. She wanted closure with her maternal side, her grandmother's memory, and any family she might have lost touch with. She traveled back to Atlanta for a weekend, determined to pay respects at her grandmother's grave. In the old neighborhood, Ebony discovered that her childhood home had been foreclosed. Weeds choked the yard. A wave of nostalgia and sadness washed over her. She'd grown up in that house, starved for affection, scraping by on her grandmother's meager social security checks. At the cemetery, she laid flowers on her grandmother's grave. "I made it, Grandma," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I wish you could see me now. I wish you could have told me about him." She knelt by the headstone for a long time, lost in memories of simpler, harsher days. In that silent moment, Ebony felt her grandmother's presence, as though the old woman were proud of her, urging her to find peace. Before leaving Atlanta, Ebony visited the diner where she used to work. Her old boss, stunned to see her, offered a hug. Her former co-workers gawked at her designer coat and new aura of confidence. She offered to buy a round of meals for everyone in the diner. Word spread fast. Some of the patrons recognized her from the news, but Ebony brushed off the attention. She told them to keep the change to pay it forward. She would never forget where she came from. Back in New York, Ebony decided to host a small, informal gathering at the Riverside Drive townhouse. She invited Tasha Atticus, Bruce Caldwell, and a few other people who had been instrumental during her ordeal. She even extended an invitation to Victoria, uncertain if her stepsister, if that was indeed the right term, would come. On the evening of the gathering, Ebony's nerves danced. Would Victoria show up? Would tensions flare? As guests arrived, Ebony welcomed them into the grand foyer, offering them drinks and thanking them profusely for their support. The house felt warmer now, not the lonely mausoleum it once was. Just as Ebony was about to give up hope that Victoria would appear, the doorbell rang. Ebony opened the door to find Victoria, standing there, wrapped in a plain coat, looking uncharacteristically subdued. There was no entourage, no sign of her usual bravado. She locked eyes with Ebony, awkward silence stretching between them. "Thank you for coming," Ebony managed, stepping aside to let her in. Victoria looked around the place she once considered her future inheritance. Finally, she turned to Ebony. "I just wanted to apologize," her voice cracked. "I did some terrible things, said terrible things. I was so angry. If I had known about you sooner, maybe—" Ebony swallowed the lump in her throat. She saw raw vulnerability in Victoria's eyes. "I understand. Secrets poison everything. Gerald should have been honest from the start." Victoria nodded, tears brimming. "He tried, but I didn't listen. I was too selfish. I have to live with that." Ebony took a breath. She wasn't sure forgiveness was easy, but perhaps it was necessary. You're here now. That's what matters. They retreated to a quiet corner in the foyer. Victoria confessed how lost she felt after their father's death, how bitterness fueled her hostility toward Ebony. I wanted to bury everything, pretend you didn't exist just to hold on to the world I knew. Ebony placed a tentative hand on Victoria's shoulder. I grew up with nothing, she whispered. I can't imagine how it feels to think you're losing everything. But maybe there's a middle ground. This house, this money, it doesn't erase the hurt. Victoria managed a small smile. You know, Dad never let me get close to him emotionally. He always kept people at arm's length. Maybe he was ashamed of the lies he told. Maybe we both needed to face the truth to move on. They shared an embrace, awkward but genuine. For a fleeting moment, the gap between them closed. Ebony led Victoria to the living room, where Tasha and others welcomed her politely. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step toward something better than hatred. In the weeks following that gathering, Ebony found a certain peace settling into her life. She got more comfortable managing Davenport Solutions, where she initiated community outreach projects. She renovated parts of the Riverside townhouse to make it feel like her home rather than an inherited museum. She even opened the library to local literary clubs once a month, letting the grand space serve as a place for inspiration instead of dust and regret. Media interest fizzled over time, overshadowed by newer headlines. Ebony appreciated the quiet. She used her newfound wealth to fund scholarships for underprivileged students, naming one after her grandmother and another after Julia, her mother. She focused on philanthropic efforts aimed at helping single parents and youths in marginalized communities, recognizing that if her mother had received support, maybe Ebony's life would have been very different from the start. Atticus Roberts and Tasha continued at her side as mentors and friends. The Riverside townhouse became a place of gatherings, not for high society show, but for genuine connections. Ebony was determined to reshape the Davenport name into something honorable. If Gerald had lived in secrecy and regret, she would live openly and with purpose. Meanwhile, karma continued to unfold for those who had attacked Ebony. The reporter, Caroline Linton, who had threatened Ebony with false information, found herself blacklisted after her editors discovered multiple ethical violations in her stories. Quentin Davenport had to declare bankruptcy when his business venture failed, and no one stepped in to bail him out. Victoria, though she remained a figure in certain circles, lost the blind admiration she once took for granted. People whispered behind her back about her attempts to sabotage Ebony. Ironically, Ebony never gloated. She never sought revenge. When rumors reached her ears about Victoria's difficulties, she offered quiet assistance. She approached Atticus to see if anything could be done to help Victoria's finances. Atticus warned Ebony to be cautious, but admired her benevolence. In time, Ebony extended an olive branch, making Victoria a consultant at one of Davenport Solutions' charitable projects, a meaningful role, though modest compared to her previous lifestyle. Victoria initially resisted out of pride, but eventually accepted. It was a small measure of redemption for both of them. On a crisp autumn morning, Ebony found herself standing on the balcony of her townhouse, gazing out at the Hudson River. The water shimmered under the pale sunlight, a testament to change and renewal. She sipped her coffee, reminiscing about how, just months ago, she was a waitress in Atlanta, struggling to pay rent. Now she was Ebony Johnson, heiress philanthropist, and a woman forging a new path in the shadow of a father she never truly knew. She thought about how it all began, a mysterious letter, a humiliating will, reading the swirling of hateful glares and whispered slurs. Yet in that crucible of adversity, she had discovered strength, family secrets, and a legacy she could reshape. Fate had thrust her into a storm, but she emerged with a renewed sense of purpose. The river of time flowed onward, carrying away old resentments, and opening the door for second chances. Ebony breathed in the cool air. She might never have the father-daughter bond she had once dreamed of, but in her own way, she had reclaimed her story. Her inheritance was more than money. It was the power to influence lives to do right, where Gerald and others had done wrong, from humiliation to vindication. Ebony's journey was a testament to resilience and the surprising ways life can unfold. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey through betrayal, redemption, and ultimately triumph. Ebony Johnson's fight was never just about money. It was about identity, legacy, and the courage to stand firm in the face of cruelty. From the moment she entered that tense will, reading to her hard-earned victory in the courtroom, Ebony showed us all that truth and resilience can overcome even the most vicious attacks. In the end, karma ensured that those who tried to tear her down faced the consequences of their actions. If you found this story as riveting and inspiring as I did, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing you powerful stories that captivate the heart and ignite the imagination. Thank you, and until our next tale, stay strong, stay hopeful, and keep believing in the power of truth.